Hello and welcome. We will start with module 5 today. With module 5, we will look at language contact of various kinds and the resultant changes. Sometimes language contact brings in one kind of change, sometimes another. So, we will look at through module 5 and as well as going ahead, we will discuss about different kinds of language contact, how that happens and what are the kind of changes that we typically see. This will be again needless to say that we will be giving a brief overview rather than a long discussion on this. So, this module will have 5 lectures and this is how we plan to go ahead. As always there might be some overlap here and there, but broadly these are the topics that we will be covering. So, first today's lecture will discuss about different kinds of contact. Contacts can be for various reasons. So, each of those reasons we will look at tracing the history, tracing how language contact has happened over a period of time, and then lecture 2 will look at pidgins and creoles and post creole continuum, and then in the lectures after that some different kinds of outcomes of language contact will be discussed. So, today's lecture, this is how we will have like three divisions through which we will discuss today's lecture. So, the first is what is language contact, how do languages come into contact, what happens, what are the background motivation, background story in terms of language contact, that we will be first discussing. Following that different kinds of contact, and we will end this lecture with language contact scenario in India. India is a very rich laboratory, so to say, of various kinds of language contact that we have had over a period of time. So, we will discuss some of them again in brief. So, what do we mean by language contact? Now, language contact is one of the, I dare say, one of the most dynamic forces that shapes human communication, and also it underlines the various kinds of human contact in the domain of socio-cultural communication, in the domain of how societies form. It lies at the root of many things like that. So, when speakers of different languages interact, whether through trade, migration, conquest, cultural exchange, various kinds of other ways also, then they come in contact, and as a result of that contact they influence one another. This phenomenon has, of course, in recent times it has accelerated to a large extent. Earlier people used to move, so languages used to move. Now, you do not need to move physically, humans do not need to really move, but you can still come in contact with other languages because of the social media, different kinds of social media platforms, different kinds of other opportunities. You can watch movies of the another language with subtitles, there are multiple new domains of language contact that has come into existence now. So, the study of language contact, what do we do? We examine not just the linguistic outcome, but also the social, political and cultural context that drive these changes. So, not only these are at the background, as we will see, these effects also are seen in this kind of domains. So, both in case of the reason as well as impact, these it's not only language that gets affected, but also many others such. So, the definition, of course, is a kind of a straightforward definition. What is language contact? This refers to a situation of geographical contiguity or contiguity of social proximity. Both are used, and thus mutual influence between languages or dialects. Very simplified definition, this is how you can see. So, whatever may be the reason behind it, when languages come in contact, when they live side by side or in close proximity, that is when we say that this is a situation of language contact. And the result of this contact can be seen linguistically. In terms of linguistic changes, there might be a number of outcomes. So, loan words, patterns of phonological and grammatical change, mixed forms of language and general increase in bilingualism. These are the most commonly seen, commonly found linguistic output of such kind of a contact. Now, because this is such an important domain, there is actually a field within linguistics called contact linguistics that studies these phenomenon in depth. So, what are the reasons, how they may intermingle, what are the layers of and the nuances of such contacts, and so on and so forth. So, that is a domain called contact linguistics, where they study this. So, primarily starting point is language, but at the same time they look at the linguistic interaction, power dynamics as well as cultural exchange that happens as a result of this. So, what happens when communities are living side by side, what are the nuances? Many such things are studied in detail within contact linguistics. These are some of the most important scholars in the field, starting with 1953 in Weinreich's most important seminal work, Languages in Contact. Till the modern era, this field has been enriched by various scholars and their studies across the world, across various kinds of language contact scenarios in the world. So, it is not within the scope of this course to discuss each of them, but I will strongly suggest you look up these scholars. Now, the critical questions that we ask when we study contact linguistics or language contact in general, even without the linguistic, without the disciplinary boundaries, the primary questions are of these: separation versus connection, power, status, linguistic influence, cultural exchange, contextual factors and language endangerment. Not always all of these factors will be important. In some contexts, some of them are more important than others, but largely this is how we look at it. So, do languages always mix? Are we able to keep them separate? Similarly, what is the role of power and status of one of the languages over the other, or are they similar in status, and what happens when the status and the power hierarchy changes? Linguistic influence, of course, that is the primary outcome, but alongside that, what are the other outcomes like socio-cultural changes, contextual factors, all of these are studied. Now, the origin we do not know. I mean, this is not possible to know exactly when languages started to come into contact, but we can hypothesize that from the very initial stages when the humans became bipedal, early bipedal humans, as soon as they started to explore their geography, whether it is Homo erectus, Homo sapiens or even Neanderthals, when they started moving in search of better habitat, better food source and so on and so forth, they must have come in contact. So, with these encounters, communication might have become essential, and over a period of time when societies became more and more complex and sophisticated, different kinds of sophisticated communication system also evolved, and the change as well as the contact situation also became more and more complex. So, we had various intervening scenarios like conquest, inventions, trade, exploration, migration, all of these are trademark of human civilization. As we evolved, all of these became important parameters because of which communities came in contact. Early movement was because of food source or by better habitat, but eventually with more complexities in the society, we had this kind of things as well. So, whichever way you look at it, across millennia, we have had different reasons, humans have different reasons to come in contact. That is how probably it started and then it went on. Now, keeping in mind the various reasons which brings people into contact, we can have different kinds of contact scenario. One is a brief contact. Communities come in contact for a very brief period, they do not prolong their communication within that particular given geographical domain, geographical area. So, they basically communities encounter each other briefly, that is one, that is very common as well. Extended contact is when communities come in contact, but the contact remains extended because of the purpose for which they have come in contact. Trade is one. Similarly, you have other kinds of conquest, colonization. This kind of scenarios typically create a contact scenario where it is extended. They will be living side by side for an extended period of time. This has very serious repercussions for language contact induced changes. The first scenario does not have that much of influence. Scenario 3 is when indirect contact happens. So, people do not really come in contact themselves, people are not in contact, but languages can travel. One textbook example of such kind of scenario is that of Latin travelling the whole world through the spread of Christianity. So, Latin was the language used for spreading Christianity across many places. So, Latin travelled. Similarly, other languages can also travel. So, this is a scenario where humans do not need to travel, but language can still be. For our purposes, we will be sticking to the second scenario, because this is what gives rise to the most important kinds of contact induced language changes, and this is what is also open to influences of various kinds that we already discussed. So, the contextual information, whether it is trade or it is colonialism, each of them will have a different kind of a let us say baggage. So, each of them will necessitate a different kind of outcome. So, that is why we are looking at the second type, which is the extended contact, that is our subject matter here. Now, when we talk about the type of contact, there are Turgill's theory, he talks about two kinds of society as well along with the type of contact. So, one is the high contact society, where a small stable dense network with frequent interaction with outsiders, that is one kind of a society, high contact society. So, people two different communities or more than two different communities come together and remain in this is a small community, but they remain in stable contact over a extended period of time, as a result of which certain new kinds of language variety might come out. One is called Kollai Marathi, which later we will see it is actually a Creole. It has been categorized as a Creole, which came out as a result of language contact between Marathi and Portuguese. So, that is one. Low contact societies on the other hand, where large fluid loose networks with less predictable interactions. When the interaction is not so stable, not so dense, the outcomes are not always predictable. So, that these are the two kinds of society he talks about. He also talks about two kinds of tendencies, simplification and complexification. So, as the name suggests, languages in contact may undergo simplification process sometimes in terms of grammar, in terms of vocabulary, morphology, phonology, all domains might be affected. On the conversely, the other possibility also exists, complexification also happens. These are the two possibilities. Now, we will see some examples of language contact through the ages. Languages have come in contact always, as we have just said. So, since prehistorical times probably humans have contacted, but in terms of records, we do not have record of the prehistoric times, but we do have record from the let us say historic period. So, somewhere around 200 to the second millennia BCE, we have some sporadic records here and there. So, some of them we will talk about. One of the most important is the earliest among the earliest proof of contact is that of an epic called Gilgamesh epic. It is a Babylonian epic poem that has been traced back to an earlier Sumerian version. So, a Sumerian epic that was which had a later version was the Babylonian epic. Now, this was partly translated and partly adapted in the ancient Akkadian language of Babylon, and it later spread to other eastern groups like Hurrians and the Hittites. So, this is an epic that has travelled across many West Asian countries, as we have just seen. So, this is one of the earliest proof of language contact, because this when the people travel from one place to another, Sumerians to Babylonians and then the Hittites and so on. So, the epic also travelled, it was translated as well as adapted to the newer situations. Another important testament comes from the Rosetta Stone, the famous Rosetta Stone. It is a trilingual inscription basically. It had this was a trilingual inscription that included different versions in the same text. So, Egyptian hieroglyphic, then Demotic Egyptian and as well as Greek. So, three kinds of languages are found in this. So, this is a trilingual, much before today we have bilingual, trilingual road signages everywhere, various other kinds of signage. This is one of the earliest found trilingual inscription. So, this became a key, actually this the role of as a Rosetta Stone is very important, because it was key to deciphering the ancient Egyptian writing system, because it already had three languages. So, using the other language they could decipher. Direct historical evidence of language contact also are there. For example, the King Darius of the Great of Persia, in his autobiography he talks about, in addition to cuneiform writings in Persian, Elamite and Akkadian, I made inscription in other ways which was not done before. I made so he talks about Aryan as well as a language, which probably refers to some Indic language of that time. So, he talks about various languages that he used in his inscriptions, obviously pointing towards a contact among those people and as a result among those languages. Similarly, we can also find references to language contact in the writings of Herodotus, in the Old Testament of Bible and many other such texts. In India, we have the very well known Chandraketugarh shell inscriptions, which dates back to the 2nd century or 3rd century BCE. It shows the marriage of a Bengali prince to a princess of today's Sri Lanka. So, this has it is a very detailed inscription on a shell, turtle shell, showing a marriage with all the Hindu rituals that we identify even today, with fire, musical instruments of various kinds, various kinds of musical instruments are being played and all of that is there. So, obviously, this is also pointing towards a connection, human contact between today's Bengal and Sri Lanka. So, the question is, how do languages come in contact? Now, obviously, of course, we do not know the distant past, but in the known history we have all kinds of examples of language contact pointing towards various kinds of reasons. So, Alexander's campaign of earlier times when there were conquests across, so there are all kinds of kings who started out to conquer the whole world. Alexander the Great is among one of them. So, obviously, he brought Greek language into contact with various other communities and language. Indic languages is one of them. Similarly, the Croatian languages in the present day South Africa came into contact with Portuguese when the Portuguese colonized them. Similarly, the Bantu and the Croatian languages came into contact with the click sound of Zulu in South Africa, and as a result of which many of these languages now share the click sound, which is a very typical feature. Similarly, the Spanish conquistadors conquered the southern part of America as well as, so all the native language speaking communities came in contact with the Spanish, as a result of which Spanish became their official language. So, Quechua speaking Incas and the Mayans and many other communities, for example. Large South Asian population in Africa dates back to the time of the colonization. The plantation workers were taken from all over the world, India included. So, we have a lot of Indians in the southern part of in many parts of Africa. Also in Fiji Islands and many other places. Vietnamese women and American soldiers came in contact during the Vietnamese War, and so on and so forth. So, there are all kinds of reasons like this, and similarly, as a result of all of these background stories, various kinds of lingua francas existed. Lingua franca as in a medium of communication that is common for a number of communities, different groups of speakers. So, lingua franca, Greek was the lingua franca in the ancient world's West Asia, Latin in Europe till 1600s, Swahili and Hausa in eastern and western sub-Saharan Africa, and so on and so forth. And we do not even need to talk about English. English is a global language. Now, when you talk about language contact, what exactly, where does the contact happen? These are the three different domains where we have already started talking about them. So, the geographical or linguistic boundaries when people come in contact, or wherever they are staying there, if they are staying in contact next to each other, that is one. Trade, migration, colonization, invasion, of course, and sharing of ideas, practices, religion. These are already well established. In today's world, there are even more newer domains are coming up. One of them is, of course, the multimedia, mass media and social media. This is another very important area and important domain where languages are coming into contact. And the most important of all of these is the human mind. So, the human mind is taking in all of these, and that is where the various kinds of results are, that is where we see them, as we will eventually discuss. So, consequently, language contact gives rise to a new various kinds of outcomes. So, we have some of them we have discussed before. So, code switching, pidginization, creolization, bilingualism, shift and language depth. depending on the scenario the outcome might be different. So, not similar kind of reasons, but the context is different. So, the result might be different. So, there are all these kinds of permutation combination possible. So, this is as a result of which this is something we always consider a strictly socially situated, culturally mediated phenomenon. Languages do come in contact, they always have, but depending on the socio-cultural background, the outcome might differ. So, to summarize the different kinds of different reasons and the types of contact, and put it like this. So, slavery, migration, intermarriage, adjacent geographical area, trade, urbanization, all these kinds of reasons are there, and this can be divided into 4 different types of contact, broadly speaking. They of course overlap sometimes. So, socially separate, family level, marketplace contact and social contact. Now, depending on the kind of contact, depending on all these factors that we discussed, there can be primarily three different kinds of influence have been put forward. So, the influence can be of language 1 on language 2 or language 2 to language 1, and depending on which type it is, we have 3 different these are called 3 different types of influences: abstratum, superstratum and substratum. Abstratum is when languages of equal perceived status leading to balanced mutual influence. So, when both languages are of similar kind of status, similar kind of position in the hierarchy, we have one kind of influence which is bidirectional. Superstratum is a higher status language influences the lower status language. So, for example, English influencing Hindi, that is called superstratum. Substratum is the opposite of superstratum. So, the lower status or the vanquished language sometimes influences the dominant language. So, these are the 3 typical types, but not all scenarios actually fall in a very neatly divided situation, which we will see throughout this module. Various kinds of examples we will discuss, I will see. Now, let us move to the language contact in India. As I said in the beginning, India is a very unique scenario where we have not only we have so many languages inside the country, but we also had a lot of countries from outside. So, throughout history we can the contact can be divided into 2 types. So, since antiquity, the 2 types of contact is one within the subcontinent and the other with the outside world. The oldest reference to of contact of course goes back to our epic of our one of the epics, the Ramayana. So, where we talk about, where the story talks about about Prince Rama who travels entire the length of the country from his kingdom he goes all the way to Sri Lanka and all that happens. So, this is also a testament from a linguistic perspective. This is also a testament of people traveling. So, this was not unthinkable or unheard of even in those ages of people traveling from the northern part of India to the southern tip to Kanyakumari and beyond. So, this is one of the most ancient probable pointer. In the historical times, so historically speaking, several people have contacted the Indian subcontinent, people from outside India, as well as Indians have also gone out for trade purposes, for religious purposes, for various other reasons. So, the contact has been both ways. One of the oldest contact from the outside with India goes back to the Indus Valley civilization time. We have a large amount of inscriptions and coins and so on that have been found that puts it firmly into place that Mesopotamia had a trade relationship with Indus Valley civilization. So, we have Mesopotamia as in particularly the Sumerians and the Akkadians. So, we have talked about them before in terms of the Gilgamesh epic, the same people, and people of Indus Valley civilization, they had a trade exchange. Many studies exist. In fact, the Sumerians had a name for this land for India, which is called Meluha. Meluha has been recently brought back to public imagination through a famous book. So, Indus Valley civilization and the Mesopotamian region had trade relation for a very long time. We have very old proof coming out from the from archaeological evidences. So, these are some of the, this was a trade route which had some, so some cities in the Mesopotamian region and some ports in Indus Valley civilization. So, Sumer and Akkad served as the major trading hubs in the western terminus of the trade network. In the Persian Gulf route, maritime trade routes connected the civilizations to the Persian Gulf. Indus ports, Harappa port cities like Lothal. Lothal is also a very important archaeological site that has brought out all of these many kinds of proofs of, let us call it, international trade at that time. So, these things have been there for a long time. So, we have seals and signs and inscriptions as well as coins that have been found. So, one of them is the Susa seal with Indus sign discovered in Iran, today's Iran, that that talks about, that gives us a hint that we had connection with Mesopotamia. Similarly, the unicorn seal, Indus Valley unicorn seal and etched carnelian beads excavated in again in Iran, today's Iran, have been also found. So, this goes back all the way to 3000 BCE, and obviously, if there are trade happening between Indus Valley civilization and the Mesopotamian region of that time, obviously, there was language contact. Language contact during the Vedic period within India has also been talked about. This has also been discussed in the literature a lot. During that time, there are primarily two different languages. One was Sanskrit, of course, the refined language of the religious texts and of all the higher purposes, even administration to an extent, and then we had Prakrit, the language of the common people. Now, when we say Prakrit, we actually, it is not one language. Prakrit had many varieties. So, from the western part of India to the eastern to the other parts of the country, there are different kinds of Prakrit. So, there are different names given, we will see. So, the term Prakrit literally means derived, and whereas Sanskrit means refined or perfect. So, this distinction was taken to highlight how Prakrit was probably a later development from Sanskrit and had a lower social and literary status in comparison to Sanskrit. However, many scholars do not really agree that Prakrit came later. In fact, it is said that Prakrit probably predates Sanskrit. Sanskrit is a refined version which was written later, but Prakrit was always there and stemmed from the some shared linguistic ancestor or proto language. Both of them shared the origin. That is what many other scholars also say. So, this has been there has been a lot of debate on that. These are the two versions. So, one is that Prakrit came later, another says that they coexisted. So, the Prakrit refers to a group of Middle Indo-Aryan languages rather than a single one. So, the how do we know that? There are many references, but one of the most authentic references we find is that of Natya Shastra by Bharat Muni, where he talks about the 7 different kinds of Prakrit. So, Magadhi, Avanti, Prachya, Sauraseni, Ardha Magadhi, Valika and Dakshinatya. There are 7 kinds of Prakrit language. Ashoka's inscription in 3rd century BCE were written in Prakrit depending on which part of the country it was. So, if it was in the western, one kind of Prakrit, in the eastern another kind of Prakrit, another variety of Prakrit, and so on. And in fact, the earliest known Sanskrit inscription is actually much later in time, 150 CE by Rudradaman, King Rudradaman. So, Prakrit inscriptions go much older. So, that is why all of these debates. Now, lexical evidence, there are various kinds of evidence that has been put forward. For example, some scholars have identified a lot of Vedic words which has no Indo-European etymology. So, they talk about very many words that exist in Vedic Sanskrit which does not have any similarity with Indo-European languages. So, because of this there are many theories that have been put forward. One is that Sanskrit coexisted with Dravidians and the Munda languages in the mainland India, and that is why there have been lot of exchanges. Now, some scholars have said that this exchange is because they have taken it from the Dravidians. The others say that because languages coexisted for such a long time, they came up over a period of the time they started sharing them. Depending on which side of the debate you are in, you believe in either this or that, but the idea is that there are a number of words that are shared between the Vedic Sanskrit as well as the Dravidian language and other even the Munda languages of the time. This is also given as a proof of out of India theory. There are two kinds of theory. Aryan invasion theory has been of course debated a lot, and it has also been debunked by some scholars. So, the other theory is out of India theory, which says that actually Sanskrit was originated in India and it went out. That is why you have words in some very important domains like flora, fauna, agriculture and crafts that are there in Sanskrit, but not in the Indo-European languages, because they developed separately after they went out. So, there are this kind of debates that exist, but anyway, so this shows us language contact even during the Vedic period. So, it is there in the lexical domain as well as some structural domain as well. For example, one example that Subbarao gives is that of iti, which is a quotative particle in Sanskrit, has parallel in Dravidian construction as well. So, let us look at some inscriptions and coins that give us a proof of language contact within the Indian subcontinent across different languages. So, one of the most important is that of Nanighat inscription. This is a Sanskrit inscription in Brahmi script. This is a bilingual. This has also Middle Indo-Aryan dialect, which is Prakrit, one of the Prakrit varieties. So, this is written in Brahmi script. It is by Satavahana, during 2nd or 1st century BCE, during the Satavahana dynasty. It was commissioned by one of the queen and a very influential queen of that time. This inscription is important because it shows it tells us a lot of things about the time. So, one of the most important thing is that it gives a proof of the Sanskrit and Prakrit coexistence and their connection. This is also an inscription that talks of, this is one of the earliest mentions of Vedic deities and rituals. It talks about them as well. Role of women in administration, mentions the lineage of Satavahana kings, as well as talks about trade and commerce. So, the place where this was found fell in the trade route of that time, an important trade route of that time. So, these are various things that we learn from that inscription. Similarly, Khmer Sanskrit inscriptions in Southeast Asia are also very important. In Southeast Asia, Sanskrit spread not through neither through commerce nor through conquest or invasion. It is believed that religious and intellectual specialists actually took Sanskrit to the Southeast Asian countries. So, there was a gradual cultural transmission over a period of time. One of the very important inscriptions that come from there is called Devanika's inscription. It is written in Sanskrit. So, unlike the inscription we talked about before, this inscription is written in Sanskrit. It is found in a place called Wat Pao in southern Laos. It is written entirely grammatically sophisticated Sanskrit. This does not use Prakrit, this uses Sanskrit, and very sophisticated and very polished Sanskrit that too. And this refers to King Devanika. King Devanika is presented as Maharajadhiraj, great king of kings. This is a distinctly Indian royal title associated with the imperial sovereignty. So, this is there are many other indicators in that shows that culturally there was a lot of influence of India on the Southeast Asian countries. So, his virtues are framed through comparison with Mahabharata heroes and Hindu gods. This place also was called Dharmakshetra, Kurukshetra. So, this kind of influences we see. So, Indian language and Indian cultural and moral values travelling to Southeast Asia. So, obviously, languages came in contact. Ashokan edicts, Ashokan inscriptions are another very important line of proof that takes us to the language contact between various groups. Ashokan Empire, the Mauryan Empire was one of the greatest empires India had. So, this was from the western domain where Greek was spoken, Greek and Aramaic was spoken, to the eastern where Ardhamagdi was spoken. So, that was a large landmass. So, as a result of which many of his inscriptions are actually bilingual. So, Greek is used in the northwestern region where there was Hellenistic influence. Aramaic was used when areas with Persian administrative tradition, and then these were often bilingual. So, one of very important Ashokan inscription that has been found in Kandahar has Greek and Aramaic as it is a bilingual Greek Aramaic inscription. Prakrit very often was the other language that was used. Now, depending on which part of the empire the inscription was, that the Prakrit will be different. So, for example, Soraseni was spoken around Gujarat, Maharashtri in the western Deccan, and Gandhari in the northwestern regions. So, basically depending on where you are, the Prakrit varied. So, there was a lot of variety, diversity that was found. The choice of script also differed depending on where the inscription is. So, for example, Brahmi was used in the eastern and western dialects, while Kharoshti was used for northwestern dialects. So, not only you had different varieties of spoken varieties of Prakrit, but you also had different scripts used for writing them. Similar proof for language contact comes from coins as well. Many different kinds of coins that have been found. We talked about Indus Valley civilization and Mesopotamia trade relations that we know from coins. Similarly, you have also the bilingual Kharoshti Greek coin. So, this is King Zoilos' coin. This is Greek on one side and Kharoshti on the other. Kharoshti is a script that was used for writing Prakrit. So, the script says of the great King Zoilos the righteous. Now, one of the most interesting thing about this particular coin is that the curious case of the letter Z or Z as we say. So, the Kharoshti did not have the sound Z. So, but Greek had. So, what they did was in the Kharoshti version, the Z, Xylus is written as with JH of something of that sort, not JH in Prakrit. In Indian languages do not have that. But anyway, so there was a very interesting adjustment that was done to translate that. So, these coins represent a fascinating intersection of Greek and Indian cultures interaction following Alexander's campaigns. Then Satavahana coins again first to 3rd centuries common era, both Prakrit in southern Brahmi one side and Tamil Brahmi in the on the rivers. So, when Brahmi script travelled south, through time, over a period of time, through different kinds of evolutionary stages, it became Tamil Brahmi. So, the Satavahana coins had Tamil Brahmi on one side and the other side they had southern Brahmi, both in Prakrit, one side in Prakrit, one side in Tamil. Now, because of all these kinds of situations, India became a linguistic area, what is called a linguistic area, because this continent, whichever theory you believe in, the fact remains that in this continent, this subcontinent has always had a long number of languages living side by side. So, not only we had the Vedic Sanskrit, which was the most important for scholarly purposes and religious purposes, but also had Prakrit, Tamil, Mundari, all of these languages were living side by side. So, as a result of which we have some very interesting kinds of contact. So, let us look at the contact between the Indo-Aryan and the Dravidian languages. Dravidian, there are many theories. This was proposed as a different language family during the colonial period, of course. So, Francis W. K. Ellis, he first proposed the Dravidian languages as a distinct linguistic group, and then it was taken up by Robert Caldwell, who coined the term Dravidian to separate these group of languages from the northern languages. So, this is a debated domain, but anyway this is how it is still there. So, Dravidian language family as in contact with the Indo-Aryan language family. One interesting thing about Dravidian family is that the languages, there is one language called Brahui of Balochistan province of Pakistan. This is considered a language isolate. It is found in Balochistan, it is found in parts of Afghanistan and Iran. So, now this has been taken as a proof of that Dravidian languages probably travelled from northwestern part of India to down south over a period of time, maybe through conquest of one community over other and so on and so forth. So, there are not too many proof that we have archaeologically speaking, but there are some proof of orthographic contact with Brahmi. For example, during the Sangam period, the Dakshina Patha was the area that served as the critical land bridge connecting the northern part of the country to the southern part. So, northern imperial centers like Pataliputra for example, and with the prosperous 3 crowned kings of the Tamilakam, the Cheras, the Cholas and the Pandyas, 3 different dynasties, powerful dynasties in the southern part. So, it is believed that Brahmi script travelled from northern part of India to south and adapted to Tamil language and eventually became what we know as Tamil Brahmin, and written literature emerges. So, this adaptation was critical for transforming an oral bardic culture into the written Sangam literature. That is how it is put. Austroasiatic languages. Austroasiatic languages are another important language family in India. There are 2 major branches, one is the Mundari branch, the other is the Mon-Khmer branch. These are the languages that are part of each branch. So, these languages also are said to have influenced the North Indian, northern Indo-Aryan languages to a great extent in terms of various kinds of words in terms of lexicon as well as some grammatical aspects. Tibeto-Burman languages predominantly spoken in the northeastern part of the country. They have been also in contact with many other Indian languages. There are different kinds of outcomes of that connection. For example, structural influence as well as language replacement we find. So, structural influence, Tibeto-Burman languages outside South Asia have relative clauses similar to nominalization, but Tibeto-Burman languages inside India have a different structure. This is considered as a result of its contact with other Indian languages. Similarly, language replacement is also a factor of the outcome. So, in many places some Indo-Aryan languages are seen to, Assamese for example is mainly spoken in by people who are descendants of speakers of other languages like Tibeto-Burman, Thai, Ahom and Austroasiatic in the northeastern part of the country. So, as a result of which there are some language shifts that have happened probably over a period of time due to coming in contact with the powerful other languages. Similarly, we have colonial legacies, we had West Asian languages coming into India both through trade as well as through invasion. So, the initial traders brought in Arabic language. In fact, Calicut, the city of Calicut was at one point of time a very important hub of the trade relation between India and the West Asian countries. So, that brought in Arabic language. Eventually, later invasions by various people, various generals and kings also brought in or further influenced or further increased the influence of Persian as well as Arabic language in India. And then we had European colonization. European colonization, of course, English is there, English is still there. Along with that, we had Portuguese, the Danes, the Dutch and the French who also came into India. So, as a result of which there are pockets of, there are not many, we do not see that influence in the large scale, not like English, but we do see some pockets where the influence of these languages are also visible. So, Portuguese has given rise to some creoles in certain parts in the southwestern part of the country, French also and so on. So, at the level of lexicon, of course, we see more influence as opposed to structural changes. So, as a result of which there are 3 models that have been proposed for India because of the language contact of various kinds that have been there. So, there are 3 kinds. So, we have already seen substratum, superstratum and adstratum. In case of India, these are the 3 proposed. The substratum model, so Indo-Aryan influencing on other languages, the convergence or bilingualism model where languages converge, and diglossia and borrowing. Diglossia is when one language becomes more powerful, that becomes a high variety, the others become low variety, that is diglossia. All these different kinds of outcomes we see in India. We will discuss these examples when we discuss these topics. Right now, I am just giving you some examples, overall example. So, as a result of all of these, due to a very long term influence of various Indian languages on one another, there have been influence from all sides. So, in Indo-Aryan affecting the other languages, Mundai and Dravidian affecting Indo-Aryan languages, all of that. As a result of which there are now a set of features that all Indian languages more or less share. As a result of which India is called a linguistic area. What is a linguistic area? A linguistic area is a place where languages from different language families coexist side by side over a very long period of time, as a result of which these languages, even though they are unrelated, they share a set of features. Now, that entire set of features do not belong to any one of them. Some of them might have come from language 1, some from language 2, some from language 3, but all of them share those features. Some of them I have listed here of the Indian as a linguistic area. It is also called Sprack bond. So, retroflex consonants, compound verbs like a gaya in Hindi is a compound. So, there are aya and gaya, both are there. Now, the a gaya does not mean somebody came and went, it has the gaya part adds meaning to the aya. So, what kind of some kind of a sense of completion and so on. So, this is there in all Indian languages. Similarly, quotative constructions, echo words, postpositions and formation of relative clauses with participles and so on. So, there are many, a large number of there is a long list, but these are some of the most important ones. So, as a result of this and studying these factors, MNO concluded that India is a linguistic area where languages converge despite being unrelated. So, this is where we conclude this lecture. In the next lecture, we will look up some more impacts of language coming into contact. Thank you.